Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Contemporary Issues Adult Sunday School class. I'm Steve Baska, the leader of the class and chief bottle washer, and want to welcome any first-time visitors. So I think Dan and his wife here are first. Nice to have you all here, and anybody else too that we have. You're new? Good, thank you. Well, we just want to welcome you and hope you'll come back sometime. We are so pleased today to have Brian G. Knapp with us to talk about how soldiers today and throughout history probably have reconciled their duty with the nonviolent message of Jesus Christ. And it's a ongoing topic, of course, an evergreen topic that we thought we'd have a good chance to discuss with Brian today. Before we get into that, just want to welcome our Zoomers from Toronto, Canada, Susan and her dad, Joe. Nice to have you with us today. Please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking. And we are recording this for future playback on YouTube when folks who can't be here would like to see it. We've got about 4 or 5 that said to me this morning, I love this topic and would like to be here but couldn't. So they're going to watch later on. Any other announcements? Want to welcome back Steve Horst from Guatemala, who served the people in Guatemala for a week.
Yeah.
Was it a good trip, Steve?
It was life-changing.
Good. We hope to hear a presentation about it too, all the things you did with the native people there. And then Frank has a
standard monthly potato party announcement at the Atwood Supple House. My wife and I host a monthly potato party. You're welcome to come. See me afterwards for an invitation. Thank you. We have, do you want to comment on having been there once?
Second potluck.
Potluck.
a potluck. So Frank
He
will,
makes the potatoes.
You can view it one of 2 ways. One is that we're being generous in hosting you. The other is that we're being cheap and providing the inexpensive potatoes and toppings. You will bring the expensive stuff. But there won't be any violence.
okay, Frank has a little handout with directions to his house too. Okay, with that, let me introduce Brian. A few weeks ago, we had the last sermon series here about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor who opposed Hitler during World War II and wrote about his involvement with the plot to kill Hitler. And so that really raised for a lot of us the question of how do you reconcile being Christian and the nonviolent message, turn the other cheek, with evil that's in the world? How do you oppose evil? How do people reconcile and think about that? And how did Bonhoeffer? And so there was a follow-up in Fellowship Hall here, discussion with the guest pastor who was speaking about that. And I was there and Brian was there. Brian raised his hand and asked that question and told about being a fighter pilot in Afghanistan. And I remember you said when you would drop a bomb, you would pray, Christ have mercy. And so I said, I've got to contact Brian and have him come speak to my class. We've got to talk about that. And so Brian is a fairly new visitor to St. Andrew, about his 4th time. So we are glad to connect with Brian. I want to give you a little bio of Brian before I turn the microphone over to him, and he's going to just tell us about his journey and his thoughts on this topic, and he's going to take questions. So if you were informal here, if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll take it. But from Brian's LinkedIn biography, he is currently a United Airlines first officer and has been for 11 years. And splits his time between Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, where you grew up, and Denver, where he is now part of the time. Before United Airlines, he was in the U.S. Air Force for years as an instructor pilot and at the U.S. Air Force Academy where you went also. And in 2012 was when he spent his months in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and had more than 600 hours flying in combat, supporting the troops there, as well as training. He was in the Air Force for 16 years, and he went to the Air Force Academy, where he got his bachelor's degree in engineering sciences. And before that, he was Chippewa Falls High School valedictorian. So, as well as being in track and basketball and other things. So you have quite a very interesting background, Brian. We are so happy to have you here. And I forgot to mention too, that you have gone to Fuller Seminary in Pasadena. And tell us a little about that too, if you would, as you talk about your journey here and how, when you went there, your fellow students asked you how you reconciled being a soldier with the desire to go to seminary and learn about theology too. But with that, please welcome Brian.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Pete and Dana, my two friends that I do know here, and I've had them queued up to ask some real softball questions. Pete, I'm looking at you. He has a couple hard ones. I was like, no, you don't get to ask those. Anyway, thank you for having me. It was just a question I asked, so I was like, wow, you want me to speak? So I feel a little underqualified to be talking, but I do feel like there is a uniquely important perspective to give you regarding violence in not just the military and combat, but in civil society. Yeah. Right. And so really when I was focusing on this, and really what I focused on and where I came to through this is, yes, I was upfront with this issue in combat, but I see it every day in civilian life, more and more, as you can imagine. And so I do think there is some really important things to wrestle with individually as we are the victim and as we are the one in power, in a power imbalance, right? So real quick, my story, the most important thing probably to understand is, I am the son of Carol and Gary Gienap, they raised me in a loving Christian home in the Lutheran faith. Now, I know I hear Reverend Mark talking about you are an inclusive community, so I'm banking on being Lutheran is not gonna hurt this guy. No?
That's the only exception.
That's the only exception. So Lutheran.
Didn't hurt me.
Didn't hurt you either, Eric? Okay, good. So it was never hard for me to believe in a loving and gracious God because my father was very loving and gracious. My mother too was a teacher by heart, and she always was telling me things, mantras, and one of them was, Brian, I'm here to give you roots and wings. And the roots were obviously faith, and wings, well, I didn't know it was a metaphor.
Took her literally.
Yeah, but the truth is, my very first good memory was flying a kite with my dad. My very first good dream I had was actually flying, like pretending I was like Superman or something, like as a young kid. One of my first trips I remember, my parents took me to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and I was a young kid in kindergarten. I picked up a brochure that had, it was Air Force Academy brochure with an astronaut in the back, and I told my mom, I said, I want to go here and I want to do that. Wow. And you can argue, I was always very spiritually sensitive as a kid, and many people, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, would always say, you should be a priest or you should be a pastor. And so that was always in there. But I really think in hindsight, just to, go fast forward, I do think my whole life, really my heart has been, I wanted to get close to God, right? And the astronaut thing was almost like a metaphor, right? But it was a driving force in my life. And so people don't understand, but like from the time of first grade on, I truly thought about that all the time. Like, what do I need to do? How do I need to carry myself? How do I need to act to be this, right? I applied for the Air Force Academy when I was 12, and they I said, try again a little bit later. So that is kind of the background, where I say, so I never intended to be a fighter pilot, right? I always was trying to go for something different. And as it turns out, it was an astronaut. And it got to the point where, I would be working so hard to do this. And I'd just be so tired and like, I don't want to do this. And then he would put something or someone in my life to make it almost like, no, God, like Brian, I really want you to do this, right? So like I had couple contacts at NASA, and I'd be at the Air Force Academy just like, I'm spending all-nighters, this is miserable. And then all of a sudden an astronaut would visit me and go, Brian, keep it up, man. We want, we're here for you. We're waiting for you. Let's come on. So, so I was kind of convinced that, okay, God, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do, even though I don't really like this. Like, this is hard, right? I don't like engineering, to be quite honest. And, that's kind of what you have to do to be an astronaut. But one of the other things you have to do is fly high performance jets. And so it was a natural progression, to try and be a pilot. And I will say, with my dreams of flying and my memories of my dad of flying, the first time I flew in a glider, I just remember that sense of wonder as we got off the ground about 50 to 100 feet and just going, how can this be happening, right? And honestly, I just remember this is it. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is like, but really, I think how I describe it now, because even then I said, when I lose that sense of wonder, I will quit flying. I have not lost that sense of wonder. But once again, like, isn't that how we connect with God? Through beauty, awe, and wonder. But that was how I connected, was through flying, right? And so to this day, every time I fly, I feel like it's Eric Liddell when he said, he was talking to his sister Jenny. He goes, Jenny, I know God made me for a purpose, but when I run, I feel his pleasure, and that was kind of like me when I fly. I kind of call it like, when I fly, I feel like I'm participating with God in something special with a unique perspective, where, I can imagine God making the air and stuff, and me just, participating in it. And I at first was a glider pilot. And so you have to feel everything, right? And so I just felt like I was just like, oh my gosh, like, we are working this together, right? Like, kind of how God created us to work for the kingdom, right? To partner with him in this project that we call the kingdom of God. So that was, the, the middle ground, right? But then it came time for, I had to pick so I went to pilot training, and I had to pick a plane. And so this is the first time where we talk about just war theory, right? So there's different types of just war theory, right? There's the, the just ad bellum. How do you start a war? Like, what do you need? Like, criteria to start a war where war is ethical, right? And like St. Augustine and St. Aquinas all had theories on this and would talk about it. And of course, we were well versed in that at the Air Force Academy, because like all societies, they use religious language and religious, images and stuff to basically present like, hey, this is from God. We need to, in the Crusades, this is for God. Let's go do this, right? And so violence is justified, right? And so we were well versed in that. My decision to be the plane, to pick the plane I was going to fly, was really the second tenet of just war theory, which is just in bello. So how do you conduct a just war? What is just conduct within a war? And so, as you know, like, I am not your typical fighter pilot, or soldier for that matter. My mom was really like a pacifist. She taught me not to fight back. And my dad really was about the same. So I got beat up in high school because there was a bully, and I just was like, well, I'm not going to fight you. And so he was so mad, he just beat me up. And luckily I went down to one punch. And so I was like, hey, I was smart enough for that. I was like, so maybe if I go down, he won't keep kicking me and beat me up. And so anyway, so that, that is who I am. And so, but to pick a plane, I had this goal. I thought God was in this goal. So I said, okay. And I kind of, looking back, I kind of used the second tenet of just war theory, where, hey, I wanted, if I needed to, use violence, it would be against someone who has volunteered for the same profession of arms. And honest, and it was a sense of honor, like, in that kind of thing where, hey, if got the better of me and shot me down, good on you. If I got you, like, hey, it's like an agreement. It's almost like a sporting event where, hey, we all knew the rules and we all knew the risk, right? And also, you mentioned dropping bombs. Well, honestly, one of the reasons I chose the plane I did, the F-15C, well, it was air to air. I didn't have to drop a bomb. That was very important for me because I would thought about the thing where if I dropped a bomb and it went into a baby milk factory or a school, I think it would just have destroyed me. And so I was like, I don't want to do that. And then the third reason, was, I wanted two engines. So in case they shot one engine down, I could at least fly it. So there you go. So, I was in the F-15 community and, the F-15 community, as you can imagine, was not the community that I really belonged in. It was really more of a drinking culture, very misogynistic in a lot of ways.
Top Gun.
Yeah, very much. And I did not fit in at all. My first counseling session with my commander was, I was always like the designated driver, and there was this drunk flight commander that wanted to take one of my guys home, and I promised his wife I'd take him home. And so I stood up to him, and he basically said, Brian, if you know what's good for your career, you'll back away. And I said, no, I'm not letting you drive my friend. And I got called in to be counseled for not obeying a superior officer's orders. So I was like, whoa, this is a different world I am in where the rules are different. And I mentioned that's just one. And then the other thing, we would sing these songs in our Friday roll calls, and they were horrible songs about women, right? And they would use hymns that I grew up with, and they would change the words, and they just were horrible. And I would, you can't hide. It's like COVID. You wear a mask or you don't, and you know exactly where you stand. Well, I could hide with my beer because I wasn't a big drinker and I'd had Dr. Pepper in my red Solo cup, but I couldn't hide not singing. And that was a big deal to them, right? And so, but my salvation was flying, and I could hold my own flying. And I loved every time I would go fly. But when I got down on the ground in the politics of the fighter community, and when I say fighter community, it is what I am seeing now in society. That same thing where, we would tell stories, and, we had this joke where it only had to be 10% true. And it was funny and it was laughing, but now this is kind of the reality. It doesn't really all have to be true, or not even most of it has to be true. And, we also had things where if I knew Steve had a story on me, I would tell the exact same story on him. And then when he went, wait, you did that. And then he looked like he was being petty. So I learned all these things and just noted them like, this is not a great, and so I would have to, after these Friday night roll calls, go off on my own and reprogram my mind back with the hymns that I learned. And
Wow. Difficult.
so essentially what I'm saying is it's a battle for your soul. And when I chose to do this profession, I was upfront with, who do you want to be as a person? What is forming you as a person? So in a way that was a gift, because you can't hide. You can't hide. You have to, and I am kind of like on the DISC scale and S, where I want to get along and build teams and all this. And I was in a community of dominant, type A people that you can't, so I had to learn to survive. And so I had to weigh in on what I did. And I did that. And the consequence of that was my dream to be an astronaut. One night I had applied for test pilot school and I had actually made the list. I had heard I had made the list from some general connection, some general officer connection that I knew. Well, at that same roll call, I had someone come up to me and say, hey, Brian, just to let you know, the commander doesn't really like that you're not playing along with the gang. This would be a great night to get drunk and do all the things that fighter pilots do, and you might find yourself on the list. And I just went, so I did not. And then the next Monday, my name was off the list, and it was a gut punch, right? It was a 27-year-old dream. I had thought, God was in this, and so I had trusted him. And so really, I didn't really care if I was an astronaut or not. what the spiritual crisis was, I thought God wanted me to do this, and I was following his will. So if I can't trust God with this voice in my mind, how can I trust anything? And so it was really a time where I was like, I just don't know what is true anymore. Well, so that was the long story of the whole fighter pilot thing. But before that, we went to war, right? And as you can imagine, the first F-15 assignment I did, this is the whole context I told you. And it had nearly destroyed me. One of the other things, they had some issues. My squadron that I went to, they had some severe issues with maintenance, and Zane Lowry had died because the maintainers had misrigged the flight controls, and he crashed on takeoff. I show up, and they appointed a commander to fix it, and so I show up, and there's a lot of pressure on this commander, but I show up and I basically say, I'm not flying these jets, they're dangerous, and I'm putting pressure on this commander, and he gets super angry at me, of course, because I'm making him look bad.
Yeah.
And so on one of my first deployments, they had this jet that had some issues with maintenance. And I'm not going to say they gave me the jet, but they definitely made sure they didn't get the jet. So on my ocean crossings, when I went from Florida back to Germany, halfway across the ocean, I had a major malfunction where the environmental control system went full hot. And we wear an anti-exposure suit, which is essentially a wetsuit, kind of to keep in the heat in case I eject in the North Atlantic. It gives me 2 minutes to get into the life raft before I have hypothermia. As you can imagine, when it goes full hot, the 12 stage afterburner air came into the cockpit and instantly, burned the first degree burns on the face where my visor and my mask weren't covering, and melted the ear cups of my helmet to my face. And instantly I was losing, body fluids and trying to keep drinking, but eventually I was hallucinating because I was losing water. And the bottom line is, so when, I eventually landed in Iceland and survived, and it was great. They couldn't get an IV in me because my blood was just so congealed, I guess. So they gave me a gallon of glucose mixture, and I drank it right in front of them. And I said, "More, please." And they went, "Excuse me?" And I went, "I would like another gallon of glucose mixture, please." And so I drank the second one, and I drank 2 gallons of glucose mixture, and I didn't have to go to the bathroom for 8 hours. Which now, if I'm lucky, if I make 2 hours at night, So I end up in a hospital in Reykjavik, and I wake up to white walls, white ceiling, and 3 beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed Icelandic nurses that were slightly less gorgeous than my wife. And I thought I was in heaven, so I kind of pinched my arm, and they're like, "Captain Guinness, we need your temperature." And so I kind of give them my ear, and they're like, "No, not that kind of temperature." I'm like, "Lady, there's no way you're getting that temperature on me." And so they say, "Well, we're going to get the doctor if you resist." I said, "Well, you can get the president of Iceland. I'm not doing it." Anyway, I walk out of the hospital to try and find my flight lead, and it's 44 kilometers to Keflavik where I landed, and I knew I was in no state to do that. So I walked back in, and the guard met me. He said, "Captain Guinness, we've been waiting for you." And I'm like, "Have your way with me, boys." But I say that because that was my first assignment. So I have I have social pressures. I've nearly died. And so when I went to my next assignment, it was a training assignment. I was like, I am done. I think I want to be a pastor. And I told my wife, Lisa, this, and she's like, "I'm on board. Let's do this." That was horrible experience. And so we went to a seminary in Texas, and I remember it was lovely and it was gorgeous. And I was like, yes. And so my assistant pastor was with me, and I was going to sign the commitment to it. And something prevented me from signing that paper. And my wife is like, "This is awkward, Brian. Everyone's watching, and, sign the paper." And I said, I can't. And she goes, "Well, what do you mean you can't?" I said, "Honey, I think we need to go back to the F-15 community." And she's like, "Well, what do you mean? That nearly killed you." And I said, "Yeah, it did." She goes, "And you hated those guys." I'm like, "Exactly. How can if I want to be a pastor, how can I hate the very people that I was sent to, right? I need to learn something. There's something I need to learn, right?" And so we decided we're going back. And it was a hard decision because the war was kicking off, and I knew the squadron I was going to the war. But the difference of that next assignment was an attitude. It was like, I liken it to, have you guys all watched The Passion of the Christ? I mean, it's a pretty graphic movie Mel Gibson made about Jesus's last hours. And I'm not here to comment on the movie, but I will comment on one thing that was so striking to me. It was when Jesus was, at Golgotha, like and they're about to nail him on the cross. And I always thought that when Jesus was in that state, once again, totally artistic impression or, expression. I don't know if this is true, but the way Mel Gibson presented it was, I always thought that Jesus was like, okay, have your way. I am a passive victim in this whole thing. But the way Mel Gibson had it was Jesus was actively rolling onto the cross and almost actively helping them do the violence to him. And I just remember like, okay, like I am choosing to go into this community with a different purpose, right? I need to learn how to love the people that did harm to me, to love the people that really were my quote unquote enemies. I mean, they weren't my enemies. I actually loved a lot of those guys, but I hated what they did to me and my soul and just everything. So that was the context of going into war, right? So, and it was really interesting. You can imagine the peace I had going to war because like I now was like, okay, I am really not happy that I am a fighter pilot still. I was hoping to be up in the space station by now, but I'm like, if this is where you want me, then let's go, let's do this. And my prayer during the war was, well, there's a fighter pilot prayer, which this is a rated PG version of it is, please God, don't let me mess this up. Because you're always one decision away from just bad things happening. But really my prayer was, God, calm the storm, which should be the war, calm the storm or calm my mind. If you can't calm the storm, clear my mind so I can think clearly, like and make good decisions, not that reactive, like amygdala hijacked, reactive things where I just shoot before I think or something like that. Let me calm my mind so I'm making a decision based on, okay, I have signed up for this and I signed up to protect the people that I flew. That was my job. And so like if someone was going to harm the people that I was supposed to protect, yes, I really don't want to, but they would get millions of dollars of missiles raining on their jet so I can protect Pete if I was flying with Pete. I honestly I had made peace with that, even though I knew there was a consequence. And the consequence I knew was the guys in the first war that had a kill, that had shot someone down. It wasn't that they were ashamed of what they did. They flew, of course, with the ROE. It wasn't that they even weren't proud of it. But I always called it the 1,000-mile stare. It was, they knew they did something they could never take back. And
Brian,
Yeah.
just to clarify, you weren't dropping bombs, but you
Correct.
were doing air-to-air combat with other airplanes.
exactly.
And so shooting
Yeah.
missiles.
So it would be
at
a
them.
missile or a gun. So it was all against another plane. So it would have been the Russian-made MiG-25s or MiG-21s or maybe an F-1. So that kind of stuff. And honestly, I had made peace with that a long time ago because of all that just war stuff that we've talked about.
And Brian,
Yeah.
you might just be honest and ask, did you shoot down a number of airplanes?
So good question. So here's my next prayer. Because, and then let me just set it up for. So my prayer was, Lord, calm the storm or calm my mind, calm the storm or calm my hand if I have to, because you have to fly. And so one night, we had basically, as an American Air Force, we had done a lot of propaganda with the Iraqi Air Force, and we said, hey, here's the deal. We don't want to shoot your planes down. Like, we just want Saddam out. We want you to have an Air Force at the end of it. So don't fly and we won't shoot you down. Like, that's the rule. Like, we're not even going to bomb your planes if you just don't taxi for takeoff, right? Well,
So this was in Iraq.
this was in Iraq.
Not Afghanistan.
Afghanistan.
Yeah, this is Iraq. I'm sorry. This is the Iraq War, the Iraq Operation Iraqi Freedom. And so that was the deal, I guess, And the war was really an unfair fight, which my wife and mom loved, because if you're in a combat situation, you don't want it to be a fair fight. Like, we had night vision goggles, they didn't. We had fighter data link, so I could see everywhere, that every plane that was on there. They did not, they were blind. And so it really wasn't even, to me, fun. Not that I can say it was fun, but it wasn't a challenge. Like, there was no real challenge to it. And so I wasn't actually looking forward to anything at all. But one night, an Iraqi plane was taxiing to take off. And like I said, we had such air dominance. We have a plane that listens to their communications, and they called me and they said, "Call, it's Claw 2, Claw 2, someone's taxiing to take off. Get ready." And I just went, "Here we go." And so I was in position to make the intercept. And like I said, I was just like, I said, "Brother, don't do it. You're gonna take off. And the second you take off, I'm gonna shoot you." And I just don't want to do this. And the bottom line, we had such air dominance. We had time to go, "Hey, who else has a bomb?" And someone said, "I have a bomb." Well, if he goes into position on the runway, drop the bomb. And he did, and they dropped the bomb, and he blew up. And so by the grace of God, I did not have to do anything, right? Because how that probably would have hurt, just, destroyed me in terms of how my psyche was. But at the end of that mission, when I came back, that is when I was listening to a Michael W. Smith song, and it was "Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy."
Very difficult.
And I cried. And like I said, we make these just war theories. We make this. And this is why when I tell you, it really bothers me what's happening right now. I was a young fighter pilot in a German base. I went to Dachau in 1996 as a 20-some-year-old. And I went through that museum at Dachau, and I said, with one question in mind, I said, "Can this happen in America in 1996? And I went through and I went, "Oh my gosh, that could happen. Oh my gosh, that did happen. And I can see this maybe happening." Fast forward now, I'm in, my 50s, and I'm like, oh, it's so traumatic, because I'm like, this is happening. My worst nightmare is happening, right? And I guess I say this whole "Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy," why I say this in terms of where we are all at as civilians, right? Yes, may have consequences by violence being put on us too, but we also can be violent towards the other. And what I learned that night is there are two victims in violence. There is the person who the violence is directed to, but there is also violence to the oppressor.
Yeah.
And I do think Dr. Martin Luther King understood that with his nonviolent approach. And so, to the question, so Dr. Hale basically came up, and, she has an impossible task to distill all the teachings of Bonhoeffer in half an hour, right? But it was something I struggled with, because when I studied Bonhoeffer, I see this guy who was Lutheran. Sorry. Just in case my Lutheran friends are watching. Yay, Martin Luther, yes, yeah. So, in 1929, he had made a statement like something like, "Hey, if you're going to cause harm to my family or my clan, like I could use violence." This is 1929. And honestly, that's how I feel, because in honest truth, I am not a pacifist, because if someone breaks into my house and wants to threaten my wife or my kids, I mean, maybe not me, I'll accept the hit, but you mess with them and it's either me or you, or at least neutralize you. And so I can't say, and this is why when I said in that, I am a paradox. I am a military officer that hates war. I'm a fighter pilot that went to seminary. I am a Christian, but I just can't let that happen, right? I just can't. And so I can't accept that pacifist position in that sense. So later on, when Bonhoeffer went to New York City, very influenced by the African-American church, but also influenced by that French pacifist, Jean, I can't remember his last name, Lazard.
Yeah.
Anyway, but Lazard had something in common with me, because after the war, I knew I needed formation differently, right? I mean, I was like, the stakes are high. Now I understand the stakes. And I didn't predict what's happening now in society. But what I did predict was I need to be formed better. I need to be formed differently. However, I was formed in my churches before, I need to be. So what I did was I would memorize the Beatitudes. I would memorize the Sermon on the Mount. And when I'm working out, it takes about a minute and 30 seconds to recite, and I use the Message version, Eugene Peterson's. It takes about a minute and 30 seconds. So anytime I had to do a minute and 30 seconds of working out, I would just, instead of hacking my clock, I would say that verse. And I would do it every day and every day. And I have done this since, well, Pete and Dana, since I've, back at the academy. So that kind of thing. And so when I heard Bonhoeffer was influenced by this French pacifist who really tried to teach him, like, no, this Sermon on the Mount is not just descriptive, it's prescriptive, right? And so it's interesting because that requires a level of formation and courage that quite honestly is hard to really describe. When I talk courage, there's a couple of things, and I wonder if I just gave this. Okay, so when I was a kid, I was a Boy Scout, or Cub Scout at the time. I was in like 3rd grade, and I had to interview the principal for a merit badge. And I was terrified because I hated speaking in public as a kid. I'm not really so keen on it now. My mom knew I was terrified. So like a great mother who was a teacher, she wrote this courage on a slip of paper, and she said, Brian, put it in your pocket. And if you're ever afraid, reach in your pocket and hold on to your courage. So I go to the principal's office, and the secretary calls me in, and I reach in my pocket, and there was a hole in my pocket. My courage was gone. And I was terrified, but I still did it. But fast forward, so let me just talk about courage in the war. Like, we were so prepared for the war. Like, when we do this exercise right before we deploy. We go to Red Flag, which is in Las Vegas, where we simulate the first 3 days of the war. And generally what you do is you do like this little mini threat that they're not very good for the first week, and the second week they really make it almost like an equal match. We did so well on the first day, they went, well, we're just going right to the hard stuff the next day. So like, we were so prepared. And honestly, I mean, there's, as a fighter pilot, like every country in the world, when we showed up, if there was a harder problem, they'd say, could you guys take that? Because we'll take these little guys, so that's where it was. But the first night of the war, you would think that you're afraid, right? Because you're going to war, right? But honestly, I wasn't really. There was a Christian aspect to it. Like, I felt at peace, like, God, if this is how you're going to take me, that's fine. And I had already dealt with nearly dying over that Atlantic. So I kind of had already dealt with that. And but when I went into the war and I saw the stuff and the people shooting, and I was like, holy cow, like, this is real. Like this is really happening. And so the second night of the war, I was scared. I was scared because I was like, yeah, there is a good chance that one of us might not come back, kind of thing. And so that's why I'm thinking of Mom, right? And going, the realization that courage is not being, it is not an absence of fear. It is acting despite the fear, right? So there you go. So those are kind of the lessons I've learned. And with Bonhoeffer, to bring it home to like us, so the Sermon on the Mount is always forefront in my mind. And now how I think about it is, we have two sides of our society, and they've made it impossible not to pick a sides at certain times. So when Dr. Hale was talking, and she mentioned this, hey, there is the put your head in the sand, and I don't want to read another newspaper article, or I want to do a plot against Hitler, right? Perhaps. And I raised my hand at one point. I'm like, that is a false dichotomy. Mm-hmm. We have another choice, but it is a costly choice, right? It is a costly choice. And almost like when I was a kid, I almost feel I had it right. Like when the bully showed up and hit me, I accepted the violence and I didn't hit back. At the time, everyone thought I was a coward or whatever. But in hindsight, what my parents were teaching were there are certain times in life where you take the punch, you take the violence, and you absorb the violence. And honestly, isn't that what Jesus did?
Yeah.
So,
On that,
yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
So I think about that because, and I'm not saying this is a life or death thing. There are micro choices that we make.
Yeah.
And I just gave this slip of courage. So, I didn't get much sleep last night because I'm hosting some friends and, they showed up way late and, so we were up way late in the night and, they had their daughter-in-law who their son was deploying for 6 months and he's special tactics. So he can't talk to her for 6 months. And I gave it to her and, she is very, and I'm like, this is the time in life. Yes, I know you're afraid. You have every right to be afraid. It's time for courage, right? So I gave her that. But what I would love to do is give everyone, all of you, like this time in the world, I see so many parallels to what I've learned in combat. And let me tell you, like when you have the option to use violence on whatever side you're against, just remember what I learned was it just makes you a little less human. Just a little bit. It's not that God's grace can't cover it. Of course it does, but it just makes you a little less human. And depending on your temperament or whatever, you could become someone you don't want to be before you know it. And it's game over. And I'm not saying game over, you're going to hell, whatever. But I am saying you are not becoming the person you should be. And you're not able to participate in this kingdom project, what we're all supposed to. And let me tell you, like, I am the first to admit, I am not a great kingdom participant. I am a paradox, right? I am a paradox, like every person in history, like Paul, I have been willing to kill people, and yet I talk to you like this. So I look good in it, so go ahead, Steve.
We've got about 17 minutes left, just a
Yeah.
quick time check. On the question of how do we reconcile when violence is justified? I think a lot of us, Brian, look at Jesus' admonition in the Bible to turn the other cheek, give your coat to let someone hit you and absorb it as the ideal. But it was never intended to address every situation, including when somebody's attacking your family or your country. And so I think a lot of us recognize that Jesus would want us to protect our family and our country, and so it's justified.
Yeah.
But he never explains that in the Bible. The Bible's not meant to cover every situation. Do you look at it that way too? That nonviolence is the ideal, but not always the way that it has to be done.
So yeah. So just a light question. Pete, you were supposed to ask that question. So here's how I would answer that. I've already told you how I would probably handle someone trying to attack my wife or my kids. Here's what I would say. We need to be thinking creatively on how to handle violence. And one of my prayers over Iraq, the third prayer I had, other than please don't let me mess this up, calm my mind or calm my hands, calm my mind or calm my, that prayer. I just prayed, Lord, if there is any way I could do my mission, protect my people, and not have to shoot down another human being that may be a father or a husband, help me do that. Please help me do that. I would really appreciate that. And at the end of the war, as I look back on it, I don't know if you realize the Iraqi Freedom War was the first war when the opposing Air Force never took off. Now, I told you we actually killed someone before they took off, but that was my prayer. And so to answer your question, I do think we do have to think about, is there a creative way we can respond to violence against us to where we are not responding with violence back, but we are showing them, you must be forced to deal with my humanity. I am a person too. you are a person, you have to deal with my humanity, like when, Jesus was talking about, hey, when they ask for your, your cloak, give them your shirt as well. That was the horrible foul back in those days, because you're this rich person, you're demanding this because they owe you this, and now you're basically making them destitute, right? And that was supposed to embarrass the oppressor to go, what are you doing, right? But it was forcing people to deal with your humanity. And so I guess that's what I would say. And the other question, the other add-on to that is harder, because there is an element of trust. I mean, if we know all things will be good and all things will be new at the end, do we trust that? Do we trust that? And the honest truth is, if I'm honest, I don't. There would be times where I would fight and I wouldn't, but I totally understand the other perspective where, yeah, some people are like, have no problem with that. But like I said, I'm speaking for myself, and that's where I've come on the question.
Okay, before we go to questions, just real quick, just war theory addresses when war is justified in the eyes of even the Catholic Church as well as other countries. Catholic Church in 1992 listed 4 conditions it considers when war is justified. First is when the damage inflicted by the aggressing nation is lasting and grave. Second is all other means to put an end to the war must be shown to have been impractical or ineffective. The third is that the war must have a serious prospect of success. And the fourth is that the use of arms must not produce evil or disorders graver than the evil that is to be eliminated. So that's a quick.
And I think it is important to understand though that Nazi Germany used just war theory to justify what they did as well. So I think it's
They felt
important.
they were oppressed and they were in the fight.
Exactly, yeah.
Ron's twisted Bible verses. Those that beat their swords through the plowshares may end up plowing for the people who didn't.
Oh.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I also, I remember in my life two early incidences. My mom hired a lady around 1958 and 59 after the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. And this lady had come from Budapest, and she recounted some of the horrors of the Russian invasion of Hungary. And then also I was in a physics class with a young man whose parents had fled from Latvia, Maris. And when he told me what the Latvians thought of the Russian aggressors. And it helped me realize that there's times in life where you need to, you have really no moral choice but to fight and fight hard. So.
Go ahead.
You must have been tempted to hang on for 4 more years and you served 16 years.
Actually, I did serve for 20, so
Oh, you did?
I did retire.
My second question is, what do you plan to do with your Fuller Seminary education?
Can we hear that again? We can't hear.
What does he plan to do with his Fuller education degree?
Well, so when I applied for Fuller, I was a little bit of an outlier. I was the only fighter pilot in my seminary class. And when I went in person the first day, I stood up and I introduced myself and I said, "Yeah, I honestly feel like I'm a recipient of affirmative action or equal opportunity because I am the only one." But my case when I did my application, and I said, I honestly feel for some reason, I don't understand why, but God has placed me in this community. And I feel like I am here to witness, to love this community. And so.
Your seminary community?
Yep. And, so that's how I view life, is that, all education and formation is done to love my neighbor. And honestly, at the end of seminary, I honestly thought about what did I learn, because it was different than what I actually did learn, like the big takeaways. And my key takeaway after seminary was live fully. Ask yourself, what do you want out of life? But ask it with this thing, knowing that God has made and formed me. And these are the skills he has made and formed me with. And with that understanding, live fully into that, love fully into that. Even love your enemies as you can into that. And that was that, and that is how so when I teach at United, it is a ministry. When I go to a coffee shop, that is my witness, that is my ministry. And so it's very earthy and it's very, I always thought I'd be a pastor, or everyone always thought I'd be a pastor, but I actually like this because I'm not tied to anything. I don't have any restrictions. I can just see who's in front of me and love as I am able to. And
So your faith was strengthened instead of the cliche, instead of it becoming cemetery, your faith was strengthened.
oh, totally, yeah. And
Because that's the joke when you go to seminary.
yeah.
Your goal was not to be a pastor. Your goal,
Honestly,
what was your goal going
my
to
goal was
seminary?
to figure out why did I live and other people died? How did this whole happen? I wanted to be an astronaut and I ended up a fire. I didn't understand. I was like, why? And I wasn't mad at God. I was just like, how does this life happen? And I never got answers. But so that was my takeaway, is like, well, you may never know. So live fully anyway. Go live and love fully anyway. And you may never know.
Let's take questions. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I just, in terms of living, fully and yet being able to project your humanity. I don't know if a lot of you know that there was a national cry for people to send in postcards to President Trump in order to protest the way things are being done lately in our government. And so it's just, sometimes I think it's not exactly what you say as much as it is to let President Trump get this bundle of postcards in these days in order to say, wait, we need more thoughtfulness in your policies.
Yeah, amen.
Softball question, Pete.
Foil method. Ryan, did you have any interesting or meaningful interactions with any of the students when you were an instructor at the academy, kind of with everything you had learned over your years?
Well, so the reason I went back to the Air Force Academy at the end of my career was I did want to mentor the next generation, especially Christian leaders. But honestly, at that point, I just saw everyone as a human being. And like, I just wanted, I look at it now as like you're my kid. I just want you to know, and one of the things I was like, hey, if you want to be a fighter pilot, that's great. Here is the reality. Here's what you're going to have to deal with. This isn't Top Gun. Like, there is some stuff. And if you want to do that after I tell you the truth and really what it's like, go with God and do good work, right? Or whatever. So yeah, I had some great opportunities when I was running the flying operations for the cadets, and it was meaningful. Yeah. Thanks for the softball question too, not the foil.
How was that received by the generals, the upper echelon?
Well, so, I am not proselytizing when I was in the Air Force, and, that kind of stuff I don't do now. Honestly, so here's a good example. The next war was Afghanistan, and the squadron, I was flying a different aircraft, but it was just it was not a fighter plane. So I actually was fine with that, so I was like, yeah, I don't have to make these calls. The squadron had a horrible morale and horrible issues, and they eventually made me director of the operations to fix it. And the first thing I did was I said, hey, we need to communicate, we need to talk, we need to, and I looked and I said, all of this, the junior enlisted, I said, we take care of them. They never have to buy a meal, or we are always taking care of them. And I didn't say a word about my faith. I didn't say a word about God or Jesus. But by the end, the enlisted were calling me, my call sign was WAD, word of the day. They were calling me Father Wad. And honestly, it was probably like I got, they wanted to give me so many awards for Afghanistan after turning the squadron around. That was the most meaningful thing that ever, because I didn't have to say anything. I did not have to say words. So same thing, my whole career is like the Air Force said, you can't proselytize. And a lot of my conservative Christian friends were so angry, like, no, we need to force this. And I'm like, no, I think they should know based on how you treat people,
Yeah.
that something is different.
Right. In the back.
I have a, more on a personal level, I have a very similar background as you, almost very similar. And so what I'm having difficulty reconciling right now, I'm very comfortable in a reasonably progressive, open and affirming congregation. I consider myself to be Christian. That said, I have many friends that also share a very similar backdrop, but they're more Christian fundamentalists, and we maybe have very strong disagreements on DEI in the Air Force, about senior leadership transfers, about the war in Ukraine. And I don't know if you find yourself in those conversations with people who I believe are deeply committed Christians.
Yeah.
And we have vastly different perspectives.
So as you can imagine, in the military, when you go to pilot training, it's all in the South. And in the Air Force is super conservative, right? The academy was, and then the communities I was at were, because they were the only ones that I could connect with, right? And what I learned was, as being in those really super conservative communities, I grew to love those people. And then now I live in Wisconsin and Denver, and the circles I around with are more progressive and stuff. And I love those people. And so when I'm around my super conservative friends, like the tool I use is I'm just curious. And I go, and they're like, we don't want to talk about this. I'm like, no, can we talk? Because my rule of thumb is 100% respectful, 100% candid. Let's have a dialogue. Be curious, ask questions. Tell me, how did you get to this position? How did you come up with this stance kind of thing? And, I can try it on and I don't have to wear it. I can say, you know what, that's fine. We have differences, but I do feel that the posture you take towards different people of different opinions, honestly, it's the game today. Bonhoeffer's question was, who is Christ for us today? I think, well, what's your name? Russ? I think the key question for us is, how do we love those that disagree with us today? That is the key question today. And to me, curiosity and 100% respect, while keeping 100% candor and going, well, I respectfully disagree because, are you willing to have a dialogue with this? Okay, no, okay, that's fine. That's fine. I can still love you, but are you willing to have a dialogue? Well, then let's go. Here is my, this is what I feel and this is why I feel. I'm really interested in how you feel. Can you?
I actually believe, I have so many close friends that I deeply love. They're very conservative. It doesn't take away from that, but I really think that's the challenge moving forward. In the environment that we're in right now is bridging that gap. And then, because that's the only way forward. Otherwise, it's just.
You're right, Russ. But here's the other side to that. If we stay into our little echo chambers, the game is done. The game is done. I intentionally seek out people I disagree with. When I was a director of operations in the Air Force, I intentionally put people on my team that I knew didn't like me because I knew they would tell me the truth.
Lincoln did the same thing.
And actually, I read his book, that book on him right before, The Team of Rivals. But that is very true. I put people in that disagreed with me, that would force me to challenge my assumptions. Because I am very human. Like, some of my conservative friends have challenged my assumptions. I'm like, okay.
I like your opening though. I'm curious how you.
Yeah.
I love that opening.
We've got just a couple minutes left. I need to ask a question. We don't often have a chance to talk to a pilot, a United pilot, or one of the other large airplane carriers. So tell us, Brian, is there a pilot shortage today, and is there an air traffic controller shortage?
Yeah.
What's it like today, and is there any reason for people to be more scared of flying than at any other time in the past?
Yeah, I just had a cousin of mine ask the same question. So first of all, my perspective as a United pilot, we have a new CEO and he made a huge gamble during COVID. He predicted that people would always want to travel and connect with people. Yeah. And that makes sense. So during COVID, he purchased the largest order of and this is me speaking as a person. I am not speaking for United. He did the largest order of narrow body planes, largest order of wide body planes. He put major purchases for our training center, which was already the world's largest. And now we're, doubly the world's largest. And we've got more, space that we're going to build. So for us, we have not stopped hiring, even with this latest downturn, like we are still hiring and we have tens of thousands, or at least thousands of applicants. So we do not have a pilot shortage at all. The FAA controller thing is a different story from what I know. I'm not an expert, but you know, our CEO has talked, that is a challenge. We were down significant numbers and firing more was not probably a great answer. Do I think it's safe to fly? Yes, but we do need to fix two things in the FAA. We need to hire, we need to staff it appropriately, and it is not staffed appropriately. Because we're only going to get more planes flying and more capacity. The second thing, we need more modern technology. We're using 1950s technology. And we need to fund that. If not, we are going to have things happen. So if those two things don't get fixed in the relative near future, I think we will have problems. And I would, you know, but what I've learned about the safety program in the airlines compared to the Air Force and maybe the Navy, it is very impressive because like when I see something, or if I make a mistake on, you know, on the line, you can write up a form and just admit to it and be like, hey, this is happening. And they go, hey, no harm, no foul, as long as it wasn't criminal or intentional. And the purpose is we want to improve it and be safer. That is why we're the safest air traffic control agency in the world. And when I go to like Mexico, I go, whoa, yeah, we are safe because that is very different, right? Not to dog on, you know, the country, but
Sure.
our system is safe for a reason, but we cannot ignore it much longer. And then it might not be as safe.
Very good. I wish we had more time, but we are out. Thank you, Brian, so much for your time. Maybe Brian can stay a few minutes longer and talk to folks after we're done. So thank you for being here. Carol, yeah, or Ann?
Yeah, is this been recorded?
Yes, this is recorded and you can watch it, watch it later. Yeah. Thanks.
If you're concerned.
Thank you for everybody coming. Hope to see
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Did you meet any navigators at the Air Force Academy?
Let's see, I don't think so.